Welcome to this video on valuing securities. In this video, we're going to look how to estimate the value of different types of securities like shares and bonds. Securities are worth the present value of the future cash flow. The financial markets should be pricing all of the securities based on this principle. However, different investors might have different views of the discount rate or different views on future cash flows. This would explain the differences between the values for different investors. First, let's look at common shares. The future cash flow from owning a share is the dividend while you own the share, and the second part would be the eventual selling price of that share. That selling price would be equal to its future cash flow plus the selling price. That new selling price would also be equal to the future. So you see where we're going with this? A perpetuity. And what models that we see to price perpetuities? We had two models, the constant growth model and the zero growth model, which is really just a slight difference over the constant growth. So if you remember, when we were looking at present values of perpetuities, we came up with this model saying the present value of a perpetuity was the actual payment divided by the interest rate minus the growth rate. We're going to call this the Gordon model. And here we're going to associate the dividend to the payment. We're going to associate the present value to the value of the asset, the value of the share. Notice that we're doing P0, so P at time 0, and we're using dividend at time 1. So we're using the future dividend, the dividend that's coming up in the next period, K being the required rate of return, G being the constant growth rate. So in an example like this, we would see that if we are paying $2.25 of dividend, and we're looking for 11% of return, and that dividend grows by 6% per year. We're going to take this year's dividend, $2.25. We want to increase that by 6%. Multiplying by 1.06, and we'll divide it by the rate of return, 11, minus the growth rate. The result of this equation, $47.70 would be the price for this share. If we simplify this model a little bit, in a case where there is no growth, we're going to replace D1 just by D. Since there's no growth, dividend today or dividend tomorrow, they're all the same. K, we could say K minus 0, which is just K, zero growth. This is just a simple perpetuity. If we have a share for who we know what the dividend will be over time, we don't think that dividend is going to grow, just the dividend divided by the expected. So for example, if the fixed dividend was $1 per share and your shareholder requires 20% return, what would be the value of the share? So since there's no growth, we don't have to find out what D1 is. So we'll start with D, $1 divided by the rate required by the investor. 20% gives me a share value of $5. Share valuation models give approximate results. Cash flows are not guaranteed like bonds. We don't know exactly what's going to come up, and the actual rate of growth can be very, very different from what we predict. Also, some shares don't even pay any dividends. Sometimes the businesses will use these profits to finance the growth. So, does that mean these shares have no value? Of course not. We're going to have to estimate what would be the future cash flow and try to use other models to determine what the pricing would be. For preferred shares, same type of model. We're still talking about a perpetuity. There's no maturity date, but the dividend is fixed. That's already known, so that's similar to bond, like interest payments. Cumulative feature, even if the dividends are not paid, they have to be repaid at a certain point in time. They will need to be paid in the next periods before any other type of regular dividends are paid out. So the valuation for preferred shares, well, since we already know the dividend and we know what the rate of return is going to be, again, the perpetuity model is going to be used here in order to determine the value of the share. Notice that the rate of return in here should be a lot lower than for a standard share, since we know that the dividends have to be paid at some point. If they're not paid, they will accrue and they will have to be paid in future periods, as compared to dividends where the company just doesn't have to pay them if they don't want to. So again, today's price for a $6 preferred dividend, 9% is the rate of return. So $6 divided by 0.09 gives me $66.67. For bonds, two elements in bonds. We know what the interest payment is. Remember what we said. If with bonds, the interest payment is fixed and it's contractual. The principal is repaid at the end in a balloon payment. So we're looking here. What we want to figure out for the value of our bond is the present value of the interest plus the present value of the repayment at the end. So how would we go around determining the price of a bond? A bond has a maturity date. You know how many payments you're going to receive. You know the value of that payment. And you know what the future value is. Now the only thing that's left to determine is what is the rate of return that you're expecting for a similar investment. So in our example, the corporation issued a 25-year bond 15 years ago. So there's 10 years left. Bonds, as I mentioned, will pay semi-annually. So 10 years, semi-annual, 20 periods. The bond pays 8% interest. So 8% interest semi-annually. So 4% per semester. Makes my payment down here, $40. At the time it was sold for $1,000. In other words, you will be returned $1,000 in a lump sum at the end of the contract. That's what we have here. However, in order to get financing today, this company wouldn't be required to pay 10%, no longer 8%. The markets have changed, so your buyer is not happy with 8%. What he wants is a total of 10% yield over the detention period. So what we're going to do, we're going to discount our payment, number of payments, at a rate of 10% compounded twice. So 5% per semester for 20 semesters. We calculate the present value of this, you'll come out to $875.39. So this is my example here. We just did the last column. This is going to be called selling at a discount. In other words, we're discounting, we're doing a present value at a higher rate than the one that is included in the contract. So the PV of my coupon, $498.49. The PV of that $1,000, 20 periods, 5% per semester, $376.89. Grand total, $875. If we would have done this at 8%, just like the coupon, we would have come out to $1,000. What if the market has changed and your investor is looking for less return? In other words, 8% was the market rate when this was actually sold originally, but right now rates have fallen. For the same company, your investor would be willing to get only 6%. 6% would be a very happy investor. So we're going to discount the payment and the balloon at a rate of 6%, and we'll come up to a value of $1,149. This is being sold at a premium. In other words, your investor will be losing $149. He knows that. There is a capital loss of $149 already programmed inside of the bond value, because when he's going to get at the maturity date, he's going to get $1,000. In the opposite case, there's a capital gain up here in order to make up between the 8% and the 10% that's required. 8% is going to be paid as the coupon, And the difference has to come from capital gain. So you'll notice that's what's happening in here. So I hope that was clear. Now, go on Leia, you'll find exercises. We'll be posting up answers later on, the solutions to these exercises, to making sure that you get your hands around the problem. See you in class.